Hello, today let's have a look at a hand of mine in a 3-bet pot. By the turn we will have an interesting decision on whether to go or not to go all in, and for this decision we need to apply a few concepts. But let's start from the beginning. We open pocket queens in the 200 6 mark table, that is only 5-handed here, and our opponent on the big blind 3 bets. Please pay attention to the size, which is the very first decision that affects all the hand. We open to just above 2.1 big blinds, and our opponent is 3-betting to $17, which is 8.5 big blinds. This is a very small 3-bet size from our opponent, which will impact what we do pre-flop and post-flop with this pocket queens. Let's have a look at his ranges. Here we have two sims. I'm comparing them. Please have a look at both of them and I will explain the differences. You see how the ranges shift a little bit, right, between the two ranges. So what is happening here is this range is the range he should have when using a large 3-bet size on the big blind. And then the other range is the range he uses when he has a small 3-bet size. In theory, at least, with the larger size, you should be more polarized, which is the preferred strategy nowadays. So you look here, the ace-5 off, for example, is a hand that you 3-bet. And you 3-bet a little bit less of the nice hands, like king-queen suited, for example. So this is the range our opponent should have when he uses the 3-bet size he used. And you, especially in lower stakes, should consider two things before calling. The first is our opponent could have on purpose a more linear range and therefore is using the correct size, but also often at lower stakes people still have the trashy offsuit ace-5, ace-4 for example, and they just use the wrong size. This impacts a lot because when they use smaller 3-bet size, we already need to continue much wider than against the larger 3-bet size. But when they use a smaller 3-bet size and still have very weak hands like ace-5, ace-4 off, we need to continue even wider. So be careful to overfold in position to small 3-bet sizes from the big blind when your opponent has a weak range. The opponent I faced here in this 200 table, I suppose, has a little bit more of a linear range. And with our pocket queens we have two options. We can 4-bet or we can call on the cutoff. Against the larger 3-bet size, we are incentivized to 4-bet a little bit more. When the 3-bet size is smaller, we are incentivized to call a bit more. Both options are fine, but against the smaller size, I prefer to call more often. As you can see here on the ranges, please see the pocket queen specifically here against the small size. And now you can see pocket queens here against the large size. Now back to the hand, I decided to call pocket queens here. The flop was 5-9-6 rainbow and our opponent goes for the 66% c-bet. To understand his strategy, we need to be aware of his pre-flop ranges, as on this board, generally speaking, the big blind should be doing a lot of checking, way more checking than betting. The size is okay, but if he has the more linear strategy, he is allowed to c-bet more often than when he has the polarized strategy. Let's have a look at the ranges very quickly. Here it is. As you can see on the right, our opponent should be checking 75% of the time on this flop with a polarized 3-betting strategy on the big blind. This means that also his strongest hands like a flop straight, sets, 2 pairs, over pairs or top pairs need to check frequently, more frequently than they bet. And for the ace-highs basically always check, and then you find some bluffs with backdoor flush draws that have overcards. So the king-jack suited, king-10 suited, queen-jack, queen-10 suited, these type of hands. Now to the optimal strategy for our opponent's 3-bet size according to GTO Wizard. We should be checking a little bit more than half of the time, 52.5% of the time, but we bet considerably more compared to the previous strategy. This means all of his hands that can bet are going to be betting more frequently. The ace-highs are still going to be checked more, but do bet a little bit more. Now the king-highs, queen-highs with backdoor flush draws, all those hands are listed, are going to be betting most of the time here, and then also his strong hands will be betting more often than they check. Now let's go back to the hand and be a bit more practical, as our opponent's range certainly will be different than our GTO Wizard's range. So we just are aware that on this board we do have many strong hands. We have sets, certainly have the straight and also 2 pair like 6-5 suited, and some overpairs like 10s, jacks and even this queens here. What does this mean? Do we have a strong range? Yes. Do we build a raising range? Do we start raising a lot because we have a strong range? The answer is look at our opponent's c-bet size and look at the positions. When we are in position and when our opponent's c-bet's large, we are not really incentivized to be raising here with the very strongest hand that we have, like the sets, 2 pair or straights. Therefore, maybe we could consider to raise pocket tens, jacks or even queens, but I want to explain more about this on the turn. Here we just decided to call. After the call, the turn was a 2 of spades and our opponent decided to bet again for a similar bet size. And now, even though the 2 brings a flush draw, we still have a very similar situation to the flop. All of our strongest hands are still the nuts, so we have the straight like 7-8 suited, and also the sets 6s, 5s, 9s and 2 pair 5-6 suited, as well as some top pair and the overpairs. Now the question is, do we put maximum pressure on our opponent given we have all the strong hands and we raise, or do we just call them? What about our overpairs? This is a spot I frequently see mistakes because it requires the understanding of some concepts that are not too hard to understand. In poker, we maximize our EV if we know how to play the top of our range well. Here we are in position facing this bet size, so we are guaranteed to get our stack in by the river, because either we call here and our opponent will barrel on the river and go all in, and then we just call with our nuts. Or our opponent, after we call here, checks, and then we ourselves are able to go all in by the river. So when we are in position, we have 2 ways of getting the stack in, either by calling another bet, or if he checks, we go all in ourselves. So important to realize we are in position. The second question here is, how much protection do we need? So we have a set, we have a straight. Are we afraid of his overpairs? Are we afraid of his overcards? His overcards, except for the flush draw, can only become top pair by the river, and his overpairs only have 2 outs for the set. So when we hold the set ourselves or straight, we are not too concerned about this. Whenever we bet, whenever we raise, we need a reason for this. What is the reason to raise with our top of our range here? We are not afraid to see the river card here except for the flush completing. This is not enough of a reason to raise for protection. Therefore, in short, when we're in a 3-bet pot, the pot is already somewhat large and we face a relatively large bet. When we have very strong hands, we have no incentive to raise here, especially if we do not need protection. But there are a few hands that need protection. What about our 10s and our jacks? They certainly do not like to see a queen, a king or an ace by the river. And what about our queens? Also don't like to see a king or an ace. So this is the type of hands that we would consider to go all in. Now, before checking out what happened in the hand and what we decided to do and how our opponent's reaction was, please look here at the GTO Wizard sim, and we can see that they say with the pocket queens, we should always be calling when we hold a queen of spade, and when we don't have a queen of spade, we should always be going all in. With the jacks, similar happens, but also with the spade, we go all in more frequently. And then the 10s here, according to them, are mostly calling, but there can be sims with betting patterns, depending on the range, where also the 10s go all in. Remember, as you saw from the flop c-betting strategy, whenever the ranges are a bit different, already the sims become different, so here the 10s could be all in, and similarly look with our strongest hands. Here we see the 9s, the 6s, the 5s are calling 100% of the time, as well as the 7-8 suited straight. They are all green, they just call. With the 2 pair here, we could already consider a jam according to this sim here. And now let's have a look at the out of position sim. For a rough comparison, I made a button against hijack spot with similar pot size, similar bet sizes beyond the hijack facing the bet on the turn out of position. And now, as you can see, with our 5s we should mostly be raising, with our 6s we raise, and then with our 5-6 suited, the 2 pairs, we should always be raising. Our straights and top sets, the 9s, still are calls, as well as the overpairs here out of position are calls. What happens out of position is, when we just call, our opponent's decision on the river is to check back or to bet. When they check back, there's nothing we can do to play for stacks. We see the showdown. However, when we're in position and our opponent checks on the river, we can still get the money in. This is why there are 2 things to consider when you have a very strong hand on the turn in a 3-bet pot. First thing, are you in position or out of position? And the second thing is, how much protection do you need with your strong holding? This is of course for similar spots. Other than that, you also need to look at the stack to pot ratio and of course your overall range in a spot. But now back to this hand. According to GTO Wizard, the queens without the spade should be going all in, and we indeed went all in. Our opponent was thinking about the spot and decided to fold. If you enjoyed this video, please leave your thumbs up here on YouTube. Hope you learned something. If you want coaching, please check out my contacts in the YouTube description, as well as the GTO Wizard link for 10% off. Thanks for watching and see you in the next one.